genel izleyici kitlesi için uygundur.
Saat Farkı'ndan merhabalar. Ben Feyza Gümüşlüoğlu. Farklı ülkelerden konuklarla bölgesel, küresel gelişmelere dair farklı perspektiflere yer veriyoruz. Her hafta dünyayı Ekotürk ekranında buluşturuyoruz. Bu hafta Fransa'dan bir konuğum var. Stüdyo konuğum. Kendisi İstanbul'da. Jeopolitik riskler üzerine çalışan Fransız bir uzman. Özellikle Asya-Pasifik bölgesini yakından takip ediyor. Zira 15 yıl Çin'de yaşamış bir isim. Paris'te kendi danışmanlık şirketi bulunuyor. Asia Intelligence Advisory isminde. Jeopolitik, jeoekonomik risklere karşı stratejiler geliştirme konusunda kurumlara danışmanlık veren bir uzman. Kendisiyle bu hafta biraz dünyadaki özellikle jeopolitik riskleri konuşacağız. Bu risklerin özellikle ekonomiye, dünya ticaretine etkilerini de konuşacağız tabii ki. Avrupa'yı konuşacağız. Çin'de 15 sene yaşadığı için ve Asya-Pasifik bölgesini çok yakından takip ettiği için tabii ki Çin'i biraz mercek altına alacağız. Nicolas Michelon bizlerle. Hoş geldiniz. Merhaba. Welcome to my show and welcome to Istanbul.
Thank you, Feyza.
Some Turkish words maybe?
Merhaba. Merhabalar.
Okay, not bad for the beginning. So what brought you to Istanbul first? Let's start with that, Mr. Michelon.
Thank you, Feyza. Well, basically, what I do is that I advise corporates on international geopolitical risk and business intelligence. So what brings me to Istanbul is to meet a certain number of Turkish companies and try to help them understand and navigate the geopolitical uncertainties out there, prepare for the impending risk, and try to help them understand how they can anticipate the risk so that they can protect their business in this very changing geopolitical environment worldwide.
Well, good luck. It's a very hard task, very hard job. Mr. Michelon, I also want to ask you, I want to talk about the importance of geopolitics also for corporations, for firms as well, but because I also want to know business owners, corporations, companies. I assume that take geopolitics very seriously more and more. I guess they're more aware of the geopolitical risks. And could you tell us, because also this is a quote from you, it's becoming much more important than understanding what central banks are doing, what fiscal policy is going to be about. So you say that geopolitics, importance of geopolitics has been on the rise, is increasing. So how much companies, corporations are aware of this? And could you tell us how geopolitics also changing economy, impacting economy, businesses all over the world?
Sure. I think over the past 5 to 6 years, we have seen a dramatic improvement in the way that international companies are taking into account geopolitical risk. I would probably put the very start of this conscience that geopolitics is important with the Trump presidency in the United States. When President Trump started the trade war, especially with China, he didn't start with China, he started with Europe, Canada, and Mexico. But when the trade war started with China, this is really when companies started to understand that the entire geopolitical world structure is changing. The second phase, obviously, is when President Putin of Russia started to invade Ukraine. This is really when we started seeing entire supply chains collapse because of a war situation that was totally disorganizing supply chains. So because of those two major events and all of the multiple conflicts, the more regional conflicts or local conflicts that are starting to flare up absolutely everywhere, companies are finally understanding that geopolitics is affecting their business and that they should take it into account. The issue that we are still facing is how do those companies define geopolitical risk? Many companies still tend today to look from a very personal point of view of what geopolitics is and what geopolitical risk is for them. To give you an example, a company working in the Middle East region will have the tendency to consider, for example, the conflict between Israel and Palestine and forget that there are some other conflicts that are threatening directly their business, such as the conflict in Ukraine, such as the recent conflict at the beginning of the year between Pakistan and Iran, the conflict between China and the US, for example. This also has an impact. So the challenge for people like me is to try to convince companies to defocus, to de-zoom their lens, and to look at the entire world, because those companies, whether they are big multinationals or sometimes even smaller companies, they have very global supply chains today. So they need to take that into account. And if we talk about what I said in my introduction, the need to anticipate the risk, which we do through scenario gaming and scenario analysis, then you seriously need to de-zoom and to look at the other impending risks that could affect you directly or indirectly. Many companies did not expect.
So it doesn't have to be regional.
No, not only regional.
It's a very
not
important
only,
point.
not only regional. Many companies in Europe did not accept that what happened in Yemen with the Houthi rebellion as a result of the war between Israel and Palestine would impact them. But it does, because it impacts their supply chains.
So it's almost an impossible task to navigate all those risks. I don't know how you advise to them, but also because the problem is companies are also now being targeted as extensions of their country. I think it's a very major challenge. As you also pointed out, we have seen it after following sanctions on Russia. Also, Chinese companies have very big pressure, especially TikTok has some problems also. So how do you, as a company, how can you navigate, how can you prepare yourself for a geopolitical risk, basically? Is it possible to really prepare for all kind of scenarios? And then from now, after this, we will go to some specific examples as well.
It is possible, and the first step for any company is to be painfully aware that they are the prime target in the new nature of confrontations that we see worldwide. Economic warfare now is systematic. It's being waged systematically. It is the preferred way to confront the adversary. How can I, the US, weaken China or vice versa by attacking their company? Companies have to be painfully aware that they belong somewhere. The times of the borderless corporation, the international borderless corporation, that time is over. Even if a company considered themselves borderless, the adversary will consider it a Chinese company because the headquarters is in China, an American company because an American flag waves over its headquarters. So it is the adversary that we remind companies that they are from this country and they are prime target in the confrontation. The confrontation is about supremacy in technology. It's about supremacy in control of commercial lanes, of trade routes. So the companies, being the main economic actors in that context, are the prime targets now.
Yeah, especially I also want to, at this point, ask you about some regional countries and companies, as you said also, because they are seen as extensions of their country. So especially companies in the Gulf, I know some of them also, they are very much feeling pressure from the US because this US-China rivalry is also affecting other countries and companies, obviously, especially when it comes to technological issues. So our technological ties, their technological ties with China is a major issue for some countries. So this US-China rivalry and other countries and companies' position, how do you see, how much a geopolitical risk is this for other countries in the region also?
The level of political risk is high for those companies because, as you've very rightly said, they sit at the confluence of two areas of influence. The countries in the Gulf, for example, if we take companies in Saudi Arabia or the United Arab Emirates, they are traditionally in a US influence zone. Right. The influence of the United States in that region is very ancient. It dates back to the discovery of oil in Saudi Arabia. But very clearly, it has become a prime target for the likes of China to expand its influence. For China, what is at stake is to weaken US influence in the region so much that it can drive to a unification of the Muslim world. And in the eyes of Beijing, unification of the Muslim world means against the United States. So companies in Saudi Arabia and the UAE find themselves in a very tough spot because they were hoping that they could be on the fences, not having to take sides. Yeah. But both Beijing and Washington are trying to coerce them into taking sides. One very good example, in Abu Dhabi, the investment fund G42, which invests mostly in artificial intelligence, was under so much pressure from Washington that they had to announce that they are divesting from all of the Chinese artificial intelligence companies that they had invested in. So it even forces some companies to divest massively, to pull out from some markets, because both hegemonic powers, China and the US, are sending a clear message: you are with us or against us.
So what should a company do? I think, they should have anticipated it in the first place, but let's say it's too late and it already started. So what should a company do after this stage, for instance?
In some cases, the key is to work, as I call it, in silos. Meaning, I'm going to try and produce in the Americas for the United States. I'm going to try and produce in Asia for China. I'm going to try and produce in North Africa or Eastern Europe for the European markets. Some companies have to, and most of them are doing this now, have to duplicate their operations by sub-regions. Because if you try to sell in the US from manufacturing in China, then you will be subject to, for example, with electric cars, 100% tariffs from now on. The Biden administration has just announced that they're quadrupling the tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. Yeah. So if you're a Chinese company and you want to sell in the US, you might have to manufacture in Mexico, which benefits from a free trade agreement with the US. And vice versa, if you want to sell in China, being an American company, well, you're better off manufacturing in the US, which is what Elon Musk has understood very early on. He's manufacturing mostly in China for the Chinese market. So companies have to work in silos, but in many cases, some companies have to abandon some businesses. An example, the Swiss company Holcim in cement, they announced that they're spinning off their entire US operations because working as a company from Switzerland, they are being hit and hurt very badly by the Inflation Reduction Act put in place by the Biden administration.
I was going to ask you another popular example, TikTok, for instance. What should TikTok do?
TikTok is a fantastic example because it goes beyond trade, it goes beyond commerce, it goes much beyond economic interests. The problem of TikTok, officially the issue is the way that TikTok manages personal data. The real question behind it is the algorithm that TikTok uses to promote certain content in China and very different content in Europe and in the United States. So the idea here is to try and hurt TikTok because it's Chinese and because we believe in the US that it is promoting negative messages to younger generations, that it's contributing to weakening younger generations. So here we are way beyond economics and trade. We're talking about cognitive warfare.
And it's also very much about perception, view of another country. Let's say here at this point, Western. I don't like to use this word, but this is a very broad term. But Western approach towards China. Let's say you're an expert from Europe, so you know your country's position and also other European Union countries' position towards China, and we know U.S. position towards China. It's more like a threat, security threat, and it's also very common, I guess, in the Western world that rising China is posing a threat to international world order as we know it. So how do you elaborate on this perception towards China from a geopolitical risk analysis perspective? Is rising China, is then deepening relations with Russia, rising Russia-China axis is posing a risk to international, is it a risk in terms of geopolitical perspective?
The way it's viewed in the West, which is just like you, a term that I do not like. In the United States, it's very clear. The resolve to take on the China challenge is total, and it's on both sides of the political spectrum. I think this is one of the very few topics where Republicans and Democrats agree fully. They will go on vacation and discuss this together. For the rest, they will not. Europe, on the other hand, is completely confused in terms of how to deal with China. I will illustrate this with one sentence that was pronounced with a former French Minister of Foreign Affairs. China is a partner, a competitor, and an adversary. Which one is it? A partner, a competitor, or an adversary? It cannot be the three at the same time. So that illustrates the total confusion. And that confusion is precisely what defined the nature of the recent official visit of President Xi Jinping in Europe. Which countries did he visit? France, Hungary and Serbia.
Yeah.
Hungary is very clear. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. We know the problems that Viktor Orban has with Brussels. That's an easy one. Serbia is rather easy. It's a candidate to accession to the European Union, and because the EU does not invest enough in Serbia, Serbia has to turn to China for investment, especially investment in infrastructures. Then we have France, my home country.
Yeah.
The French president says pretty much everything and anything about China. One day it's a partner, one day it's an adversary, one day it's a challenge. So it's a fantastic situation for China to play on that confusion and to try to destroy whatever unity they could exist at the European level when it comes to tackling.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but do you think the confusion, part of the reason of for the confusion is pressure from the US, or they feel the need to follow the US? Is it about the US also position towards China?
Europe is under two opposing pressures. Obviously, pressure from Washington. Follow us in our radical policies against China. We saw it in the Huawei case.
Yeah.
When Huawei wanted to enter 4G in Europe, all European governments, and at the Brussels level as well, at the supranational level, we received instructions from Washington: you should forbid Huawei from entering 4G because it is a security risk. But at the same time, we're under pressure from another direction, which is the German economy. The German economy has become so dependent on China that German business owners are doing everything they can so that the relationship with China does not deteriorate. Another example, a very simple phrase, one of the think tanks in Germany, which I believe is one of the best for China studies, called MERIX, one of the analysts summarized it this way. He said, when it comes to a common policy for Europe with China, the weak link is Germany. In Germany, it's the automobile industry. In the automobile industry, it's Volkswagen. So you could say that because of Volkswagen, Europe cannot have a common stance when it comes to China.
So that's the fact. I mean,
so
European Union cannot have then a kind of common strategy towards China.
No.
It's not the case.
When Lithuania, a member of EU, announced that Taiwan would open an embassy in Vilnius, how did China respond? Of course, China took off Lithuania from its list of customs clearance. But they went further. They went to German companies, one being Continental, the tire manufacturer, and they told them, we know you have many suppliers in Lithuania, and you're selling mostly in China. So if you do not want to lose the China market, you, Continental, a German company, go to Lithuania, and you make this stop. You, a German company, will lobby the Lithuanian government so that Taiwan cannot open a trade office or an embassy. Right. So China has Germany do its work.
Well, okay. Mr. Michelon, I also want to, speaking of Taiwan, since you're a geopolitical risk expert, of course, all eyes have been on, this US-China rivalry, trade war, Cold War, whatever you call it. But there are also fears, especially from time to time, that this, whatever this is, whether it's a Cold War, but there is a tension, clear tension between the two countries, might turn into a broader war. So especially over Taiwan. Taiwan is a very sensitive issue for China, obviously. So do you see a major risk of, I don't want to call it like a, World War III or something with big words, but do you anticipate, or do you see a major risk over Taiwan between these two major powers?
The risk is definitely there, and it is unfortunately rising. As we speak, the tensions in the South China Sea, especially between China and the Philippines, which is one of the closest US ally to Taiwan, that tension is increasing and is getting worrying. That being said, a hot war, a full military conflict over Taiwan would be of the same nature, if not worse, than the conflict that we have been witnessing in Ukraine over the past few years, which means high intensity. The problem is for the United States, how far can they go when they're already exhausting themselves supporting Ukraine, when they're already investing significant amounts of money supporting Israel, could they take on China at the same time? Two proxy wars and a direct war, and this time a direct war with the other hegemonic power. China puts on the seas every year in gross tonnage the equivalent of all NATO navies every year. War games have been done recently by an American think tank called CSIS, which cannot be suspected of being un-American. All the scenarios show that the United States does not last more than 9 days in a high-intensity war against China. After 9 days, they run out of long-range anti-ship missiles. So the United States, I think, thankfully, have a lot of interest not to have a full confrontation with China. At the same time, the Chinese army is untested. The last time the Chinese army fought was in 1979 against North Vietnam, and they lost. Since then, we have not seen them fight. Some experts are even wondering if the Chinese themselves know how worthy their own army is. They are not tested. So I see, fortunately, on both sides, US and China, a lot of reasons not to precipitate a massive confrontation. There are many other reasons that have to do with military cycles. The United States is in the middle of modernizing its military. They are trying to replenish their stock of ammunition, which they have depleted because they sent everything to Ukraine. So they have absolutely no interest in a confrontation now. And same probably with China. The problem is, the closer you get two navies, two adversary navies, close to one another, you have a risk of an accident. So unfortunately, we cannot completely eradicate the risk, the possibility that an accident happens.
Right.
But I think that we can still hope that a certain level of rationality in both leaderships will make sure that they don't go this way, at least not now. China has many ways of subjugating Taiwan without resorting to war.
Speaking of leadership, elections in the US will change anything, do you think, in case Trump makes a comeback for a second term? Which one might bring less geopolitical risks for the world, let's say?
I think in this day and age, we are all in the market for predictability. I think we all welcome a little bit more predictability. And in that sense, a Trump presidency is more predictable. The man tweets like a madman.
Unpredictable things.
But what he tweets about, we're used to it. We know he wants deals. We saw it when we tried to resolve, at least make some progress in the discussion with North Korea. This was the first time in history when a US president sat down with a North Korean president. The first time in history. It didn't change much. But if we want to change something, you have to start with this.
Same thing applies to Abraham Accords with
Exactly. It's not the result, but we have to stop there.
Right.
So in that sense, people like me doing my job, which is trying to predict what happens, we prefer a Trump presidency because it's more predictable. It doesn't mean that a Trump presidency will not continue the confrontation with China. He started it.
Yeah, of course. We shouldn't forget that, right?
We should not forget.
So we have very few minutes left, Mr. Michelon. Since you're in Istanbul, and I think you have some future plans related to Turkey, how do you see Turkey navigating all of these geopolitical risks, crises in the region, in the international arena, such as Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Palestine? Because Turkey's, geopolitical position, it's very much at the center of the conflicts and crises. So how do you see Turkey navigating all of these problems, crises at home and abroad?
Looking at Turkey from the outside, I have to say that I'm quite impressed with the way the Turkish government has been able to capitalize on the rising tensions in the region. I see Turkey being very good and becoming even better at positioning itself as a middle power, offering an alternative to older influences and older systems of alliances. I'm observing a lot what's happening in Africa. Being French, I'm quite interested in what happens, especially in French-speaking Africa. And last summer, we had a whole series of military coups which were targeting French interests. And I see in many of those countries, Turkish companies replacing French companies and doing it fairly easily because Turkey does not suffer from a painful historical background with those countries. The Ottoman Empire was not in sub-Saharan Africa. Turkish technology answers a lot of the needs that those countries have. I'm thinking about infrastructures, telecoms, logistics in particular, but also defense. Turkish diplomacy has been extremely active and extremely positive in the message that it brings to those countries. So I'm not saying Turkey is the only one.
Yeah.
The United Arab Emirates are doing the same. Saudi Arabia is doing the same. China is doing the same, obviously. But I think Turkey is particularly well positioned to play that card of the country in the middle that can capitalize on a certain level of strategic ambiguity. It's close to the EU for trade. It's part of NATO. But it also talks to Russia, but it also talks to India more and more. It also talks more and more to Arab countries. It has a steady and growing relationship with the Asia Pacific. So Turkey is able to play all those cards at once. And I think for the geographic position, the size of that country and that economy, it's the perfect spot to be, and this is the right time.
Well, time is up. Thank you very much,
Thank you,
Mr.
Feyza.
Michelon. See you next time, hopefully in Istanbul. Teşekkür ederim.
Teşekkür ederim.
Evet, Saat Farkı'nda bu hafta Fransa'dan kıymetli bir uzmanı ağırladık. Jeopolitik riskler üzerine çalışan, Paris'te kendine ait bir danışmanlık şirketi bulunan, şirketlere de jeopolitik riskler konusunda, ekonomik riskler konusunda danışmanlık veren Nicolas Michelon bizlerleydi. Önümüzdeki hafta yine farklı bir konuyla, farklı bir konukla karşınızda olmak dileğiyle. Hoşçakalın.